Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Brad Rucks, filling in for Dan Schmidt. Today's topic is whitetail management myths. I have whitetail hunter extraordinaire, Steve Bartylla. Welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Well, thank you, Brad. Pleasure to be here.
So let's get this going right away. You know, one of the things that a lot of hunters assume is a buck's going to continue to grow every single year. Is that true?
Yeah, no. I think that's actually a fascinating topic. We've all heard over and over and over, let them go so they can grow. That infers that every year this animal lives, his rack you can expect it to be bigger next year. My experience is that's generally true, but I would say at least 40% of the bucks each year, no, I'm not. Let me back up. If we're talking a yearling to a 2.5-year-old, yeah, almost every single time that buck is going to kick a bigger rack at 2.5 years old. If you're talking 2.5 to 3.5, in my experience, almost every single time that buck is going to kick a bigger rack. Now, from my relationships with serious deer managers down south, don't quote me on this, but the impression I get from them is it's pretty darn safe from 3.5 to 4.5 as well, and 4.5 to 5.5. But that 5.5 to 6.5 jump can get weird sometimes. For me, up here, in most of the management I've done has been in Wisconsin, Canada, and the Midwest. Depending on the ground. One property that I managed for years, when those bucks got to be 4.5 years old, that was generally as good or better than their 5.5-year-old rack. And the reason that I believe, should step back a little bit here first. Genetics plays a role in antlers, of course. Age plays a role in antlers, of course. Nutrition plays a role in antlers, of course. Okay? But so do a whole bunch of other things like injury. How hard they worked. As you know, a mature buck, on average, is going to lose 25 to 30% body weight just during the rut. You think about that for a second. A little over 2 months. Dumping a quarter of your body weight. That's not easy on you. Okay. Then depending on where you are in the north, they have to go through winter. During winter, they're running a negative energy balance. Now you get to spring. Okay. Spring, everybody's thinking antlers, but they're going to build that body back up before they can take a lot of energy and put it into the antlers. Okay. So on that one property I was just describing, it was very large, a ridiculous glut of mature bucks. So those 4.5-year-old bucks were not quite ready to be primetime players. They thought they were.
Sure.
They wanted to be. But they've got all these 5.5, 6.5, and even a few 7.5-year-old bucks to go up against. Their life as 4.5-year-olds, honestly, is a living hell.
Stress.
Yeah. So a lot of those bucks actually tended to go either very unimpressive jumps for 4 to 5, no jump at all, or actually lose a bit just because their rutting activity was so brutally hard competing against all those mature bucks.
Sure.
Okay. Yes, all things being equal until they hit their genetic antler cap, will they be bigger next year? Yeah, but all things are never equal.
Yeah. I noticed one thing like this year, we haven't had that early green up here in Wisconsin. Man, I'm not expecting great things from my whitetails. I mean, if you have that early green up, they seem to really blossom. That nutrition just kicks in.
Well, and you hit on such a key point here. We're both from Wisconsin. Okay. And you hear about, the deer, how can they survive winter? How can they survive winter? The winter's so bad. Winter. It's spring that kills them.
Mm-hmm.
Late springs are just brutal on those animals because they are right at that tipping point when they get into spring. Now you have a late one that's delayed 2 weeks. Oftentimes that's really what's killing your deer.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another one. Cull bucks. A spike's always a spike, and you hear a lot of those rumors. Go ahead. Let me hear you what you have to say.
Yeah, you know what I think on that. There's been one buck I've seen in my entire career, or heck, forget about career, life hunting, that may have actually always been a spike, but honestly, I think he just was so old and beaten down that he regressed. No, having that part, there's all sorts of things that I don't know in this world. I have seen so dang many spikes that next year aren't spikes anymore. That there's no truth to that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cull bucks, I absolutely hate the term just because it's so incredibly misleading. Here's what I do believe. Okay. What I'm about to describe, if it applies to 2% of all the hunters out there, I'd be amazed if it's even that much. But we cannot stockpile free-range bucks. We can't do it. I know osmosis is gases, but there's essentially, I always think of it as an osmosis effect, where you're going from higher concentration to lower concentration. I managed a 4,000 acre chunk for a while. Okay, that is plenty. You should be able to go ahead. No, what ends up happening is, I hope this isn't too off key, but it kind of reminds me of inner city gangs. The more gangs you have, the more they tend to stick to their turf, because if they leave, they're in trouble and somebody else might take their turf. Okay, but if you're that 3.5-year-old buck, if you're that 4.5-year-old buck, and there are all these established mature buck court, you want to be the man, you can't stay here. You got to go over there. So we end up losing a percentage of, in a situation like that, you're going to lose a percentage of bucks every single year. The only time I think it makes a lick of sense to shoot a management buck is when, okay, we have more bucks than we can handle next year. So if we have, I'm making this up, but if we have 10 3.5-year-old bucks, 5 of them are, whoa, these things, I can't wait to see them next year. The other 5 are, oh man, you just didn't do much. Okay. There's no guarantee that he won't make a real good jump to next year, but I'm going to bet on that one that, ooh, he's got long, skinny tines. He's already starting to kick a little junk. Long, skinny main beams. 10 points versus the short, stubby 8.3.5-year-old over here. Okay. I'm only going to be able to, I know it's not this simple, but I'm only going to be able to bring 6 of them to 4.5 years old, meaning 4 of them are going to end up dispersing anyway. Well, might make sense to shoot the least antlered of the 3.5-year-olds. Not because you cannot, because of yearling buck dispersal and a whole bunch of other, and the doe making up half the equation. You can't control free range genetics. It's been studied over and over and over and over again, and every single study comes back with no. It doesn't make a difference. But you can manage the standing stock. And if I take out 4 of those bucks, happen to take out the bottom 4, well, now all of a sudden my odds, the good ones sticking around next year, are a little bit better. But that just doesn't apply to the overwhelming majority of people in this world.
Yeah.
It sure doesn't apply to somebody who's managing 200 acres. Sure doesn't apply to somebody who's managing 400 acres. Heck, it doesn't apply to most that are managing 600 to 1,000 acres. But you start getting above that, and you're really seriously doing everything you can to pump the maximum amount of inches. No, this does not increase inches. All it does is remove the lesser of the standing stock, allowing the better of the standing stock to hypothetically flourish.
So, Steve, that brings an interesting question. Charlie Alzheimer once said, and I agree with him, 3 and 4-year-olds walk till they drop. Because during the rut, they're going to continue to look for that spot. As a guy that owns 40 acres or 100 acres, what deer should I target on my place? Because more than likely, I'm not holding them all the time. So what would you recommend?
My recommendation is to shoot the first animal that sincerely makes you happy and say thank you. I don't care if and that's the only reason that I don't like having these types of conversations is it's way too easy for them to come off, this is what you should do. There are pitifully few things in this world that disgust me more than spoiled, pampered people like me telling other people, this is what you need to do in your personal and private life.
Yeah.
Like, no, you ain't telling me what to do, so I don't have the right to tell you what to do I? And you know what else? If I have every legal right, and I do, and will never apologize for this, to make the ground on my side of the fence as attractive as I humanly possibly can for whitetails, guess what? You got whatever right to do whatever legal acts you want on your side of the fence.
Yep.
My honest advice is this is your passion. Why in the world are you allowing other people to tell you what you enjoy? Nobody knows but you.
Yeah.
You make those calls.
I agree. The guy needs to set his own, use your trail cameras, figure out exactly what bucks you want to make your hit list. And if one comes in, harvest them.
Yeah, and if you see one that isn't on the hit list that excites you and you want to do it,
Yeah.
Because that is an issue for the small. Unless if you own a 40, if you own an 80, heck, if you own 120, unless you're paying attention to far more than just your acreage, you don't know what's on there. What you're going to see this fall.
Yeah.
You don't. What ends up happening is these bucks, they're spending the majority of their time in their core areas during the daylight in this area of their home range over here because, up until the rut, I've got good food. I feel comfortable here. Everything I want and need is taken care of over here better than anywhere else until it comes to breeding. And now I want to come over here. I want to come over to your 40 acres because your 40 acres has all sorts of pretty girls.
It reminds me of the guys that are doing their preseason scouting. The deer are all in velvet, right? The bucks are all bachelor'd up. And a perfect example, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a bean field across my house, and we're looking at, bachelor group. There's probably 15 bucks in there. There's 4 slammers. And my kid's like, oh, I can't wait to the season. I cannot wait to the season. Well, by the time the season hit, we had 1 slammer on our place, and he got shot by my neighbor. What I mean? Like, the rest were gone.
Exactly. Now, one thing that I wouldn't go so far as to call it a myth, but a belief that a lot of people have that I don't agree with, is that whitetails are programmed to migrate with the seasons. Yeah, no. Their needs change. The needs and habitats change throughout the course of the year. All whitetails need food. They need water. They need some level of protection from the environments. Okay. Then they also need breeding for the species, not an individual white. But then they want comfort and they want a feeling of security. Those wants don't change, outside of the breeding part. Although, quite honestly, I don't think it ever changes. Okay, they want to. It's just their testosterone isn't there, and the girls aren't. But a doe comes in heat in August, and guess what? She's going to be bred. Their needs and wants don't change, but the habitat is changing dramatically. Okay, so when it comes to spring. Yeah, you were just talking about late spring. They need nutrition all year long, but in that spring, they really need protein. They need protein to go ahead and kick. The does need it for producing milk for their lactating. The fawns need it to resume building their skeletal structure. I'm talking last year's fawns. The bucks need it for their antler development and to build back the muscle mass they lost. Okay, so protein is a really big need. Well, if you don't have something you see often. Late winter in Wisconsin, all of a sudden the deer start migrating to the alfalfa fields.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you've got that alfalfa field on your property, they probably aren't going to migrate off of it. Get to be late winter in Wisconsin. We're not talking winter yarding, but late winter in Wisconsin, they need some cover and food. If you happen to have cover and food, they're going to be on your ground. During summer, they don't want to be harassed by a bunch of bugs, and they don't want to, the does are defending their fawning areas. The one time which is actually, I always thought fairly interesting, if there's a worthless time to scout, to actually look for deer sign, it's the middle of summer. Once fawning has started, because it's such a shakeup. That adult doe is going to drive every buck out of there. Okay. If you have the fawning areas on your ground and areas that the bucks can be left alone to bed, well, you know what? They're not going to leave. You don't. They do. It's all about meeting their needs. That's why most of these deer are shifting, is because they are shifting to meet those needs best at that particular time. You offer them everything they want and need throughout the entire year, they tend to be homebodies.
Yep.
Man. Okay, everybody, let's take a minute to acknowledge one of our sponsors. That's Traditions Firearms. Traditions, as you probably know, 2 years ago, they came out with the Nitro Fire in collaboration with Federal Premium in Hodgdon. The fire stick, they shoot through those guns. This has really changed muzzleloading. It's made it more safer, more accurate, and just much more enjoyable. This year, they have the Vapor Twist barrel on these guns. The award-winning Nitro Fire now features a 1 in 24 Vapor Twist barrel. What this does, it's a faster twist that helps better stabilize bullets, increase accuracy, and expand the bullet options that can be used in this gun. The accuracy, improved accuracy, comes from a couple things. Number one, that bullet, when you're seating it down through the barrel, it's seated on a we're going to call it a shelf. It's a tiny little shelf where you can't push that bullet any farther than that. You crack open the gun, you put your fire stick in there, which is your charge, and it's basically sealed together. That ignition with a 209 primer makes for basically foolproof ignition, shot after shot after shot, which improves your accuracy. Check them out today. That is the new Vapor Twist Nitro Fire from Traditions at traditionsfirearms.com.
Okay, so on a lot of properties that you're managing right now are big enough where you can give them everything, right? Correct?
Yep.
Okay, so now I own my 40 acres. I can put one little food plot in. What do I plant?
Well, the first question I would have on that 40 acres is, this is yours. What's your goal? What do you want? Some people don't care. Some hunters care more about watching wildlife all year long than others. And I'll try not to bat the mic around anymore. So I guess I should probably put my hands back in my pockets.
I've been trying to do the same thing because I'm a hand talker too.
Actually, every podcast I've done before these is on the phone, and I'm just walking around all over the office, waving my arms up in the air. This is very unnatural for me. But, okay, so what the heck were we just on?
I just asked you what a guy should plan if he's only got in a small plot.
Before you do anything, always ask, what are my goals? Then go ahead and do an inventory of what you got and ask yourself, okay, these are my goals. This is what I got. Can I realistically achieve that? If yes, go for it. If no, okay, what can I do? Is there something else that I could do to realistically achieve this? If not, well, okay, what could I do that will bring me as close to that goal as possible? Put your work in up front. Seriously, this is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to management is, or getting into this stuff. Oh, we'll pick on food plots because that's what everybody thinks this is all about. You know, I'm going to go ahead and put in some Antler King Trophy Clover, which is great product. And there I'm hitting the mic again. Great product. But Or am I going to put, oh, that back corner of that field, I can just take a quarter acre of that. But how are you going to get there? Where's your tree stand?
Oh, yeah.
Where's your safe wind? How are you going to get out? Okay. Always, before the first thing, if you're going to go ahead and put in that food plot, before you do, how am I going to get there? Can I get there consistently without getting busted? Where am I going to hunt? Because my hunting wind needs to match my entrance and exit wind. Okay, this tree will work right here. How am I going to get out? Okay, I can do that. All right, I've got a spot where I can do those three things that actually make some degree of sense. Now I'm going to build a food plot around it. Everybody does it, the majority does it the reverse. They go ahead and they put in that food plot, and okay, where am I going to put my stand now? Well, if you haven't thought of that before, having learned it the hard way more than once, there's a pretty decent chance that you don't have a good stand.
Yeah.
By good, I don't mean a stand you're not going to see deer from. I mean a stand you're not going to both see your deer from and not spook them at the same time. So that is the first thing. Next, I hate to say this, but I don't think there is a single planting that's best everywhere. Dwarf Essex rape. Awesome planting for the North Country. Why? Because when dwarf Essex rape is popping, I can eat dead grass, I can eat dead sticks, or I can eat this green stuff over here. Man, that's odd. I'm going for the green stuff. So I've done that, 4, 5, 6 years now, and now I'm managing a chunk of dirt in northern Missouri. I grew the most glorious 2-acre dwarf Essex rape plot, Brad, that you have ever seen in your life, and it still looked every bit that good the following spring because the deer didn't touch it.
It's funny because up here especially, and you know this, the myth is on that stuff too, is that whitetails aren't going to touch it till it freezes, right? Man, once they get used to eating it, as soon as that stuff's coming up on the ground, they're starting to pound it already.
Well, here's one thing I've found, though, is without your point, without a doubt, is so true. That is, if I got everything is what is my best alternative.
Yeah.
If I don't have a good alternative, all of a sudden something that literally sucks pond scum down in Missouri can be a true rock star over here.
Yep.
Because why? Those deer down there, heck, they were able to eat corn, soybeans, grass many times, clovers many times, all winter long. Now, did it ever freeze? Sure. But then it would thaw again. Were the beans ever covered in half foot of snow? Sure. But deer don't have a problem plowing through a half foot of snow. So much of it is absolutely, in my opinion, impossible to name what a whitetail's favorite food is without knowing what other options they have.
And honestly, it changes from day to day because you can have one plot, say you got standing beans next to a brassica field. One day they're all going to the beans, the next day they're hitting Nebraskas.
And brassicas are such an incredibly large family. And about the only good my BS in biology did me is I worked as a intern for Jake Seed Company for 3 years as a, get ready for this one, sunflower breeders research technician, which really meant for 90% of the year I was a glorified migrant worker. But for 10% I actually developed sunflower. I actually had some sunflowers on the market for a while. A sunflower isn't a sunflower isn't a sunflower. Same with a clove. You can have 15 different white clovers, and every one of those white clovers are bred for different traits. Okay, brassicas are a huge family. Okay, one thing I learned is in this one spot that I was managing, within a quarter of a mile, you could get apples. You could get apples, soybeans, corn, plums, alfalfa, everything you could possibly imagine, that acorns, that you could want. And I went ahead and put in a 2-acre plot of Antler King's honey hole, which is a brassica mix. As soon as that stuff got to and very high deer numbers in the area as well. Food was not an issue, though. As soon as that stuff got to be 5 inches tall, they wiped that junk completely out. You know what I had to do? I had to plant a different blend of brassicas if I wanted brassicas up there. One that was nowhere near as desirable until later in the season. And that I could actually have. And that, what I was trying for is I want a late season plot up here.
Sure.
You know, when a person makes a statement, I know it wasn't you, you're parroting what everybody says. A person makes a statement like, dwarf Essex rape isn't good until a couple frosts and the sugars come up from the root system into the... Well, yeah, that's true for some. True for, maybe even true for the majority. Ain't true for them all. Mm-hmm. And then you factor in what you're talking about as well. If you're talking northern Minnesota, for one thing, you better be planting in June. If you really want, to create softball to volleyball size brassica turnips, you better be planting early.
Yep.
And next, what else they got to eat?
Yeah.
They're just, everybody wants to, this is the cookie cutter approach for this. This is the one. No, every darn property is different. The circumstances around every property is different. Every deer has its own, there is not a one size fits all. The best thing you can do is get a good foundation of knowledge, go out there and become an expert on your ground, because no one is going to know it as well as you do.
I always ask, when somebody asks when they have that just one little plot that they can plant, and they ask me what they should plant, I was like, when do you want to hunt? You know what I mean? Like, is it early season? We'll plant some clovers. It'll do great. You want to hunt late season? Figure it out. You can use brassicas, you can do soybeans, anything.
Or if you have a large enough area, put in a plot that's going to apply early, a little middle, a little late. Talking about brassicas, something I do with every brassica planting I do is after they get, well, not every, but almost every, once they get somewhere between 3 and 6 inches tall, before forecast major rain event, I'm going to go out there and throw 3 parts cereal rye, 1 part oats at approximately 100. The pound per acre varies based on the stand. If it's a really, really thick stand, I'll go 100 pounds per acre top seeding right into the brassicas. If it's a light stand, I'll go 150 pounds. Yep. And brassicas are one of the few things that I actually follow the planting directions on. You do not want to plant, generally speaking, the brassica family too thick.
And why? Because it stunts them. I know. I've done it.
Well, exactly. We all have. That's how we learn. And that is, not to get off on too much of a tangent, but a big one. Don't be afraid to face plant out there.
Yeah.
I can't speak for you, but I don't learn anything from success. Yeah. But wow, is failure ever a heck of a good teacher, and wow, do I tend to learn those lessons and remember them, because they're almost always painful.
Yeah, I would agree. Here's another question.
But real quick, though, go ahead and top seed that at 100 to 150 pounds per acre of 3 parts cereal rye, 1 part oats. Now that cereal rye is a great miner of fertility that's real deep in the soil. It creates all sorts of organic
fertilizer.
It's awesome for the soil health. And at the same time, cereal rye does not die when it's frozen. It goes dormant. Okay, so now I have the brassicas, which I've used the Antler King honey hole stuff, which is awesome. A great early to late season. But as the deer are eating that off, now my cereal rye is coming up underneath it, and I've got an awesome little 1-2 punch.
So if people don't know, it's any day that it's over 30 degrees, your cereal grains will continue to grow. We do the same thing with soybeans. When the leaves turn yellow, we're out there spreading it, and the same deal. Nice greenish.
Works awesome in cornfields as well. Yep. And that's a great way to cheat. Most people are not going to, most habitat managers, these people that are owning a 40, 80, 120, they're not really farmers. Okay, they're people that enjoy doing this type of stuff. A great method for getting yourself some corn and soybeans, if you're leasing the farming rights, in the lease, negotiate with them. Okay, what's your input cost per acre of corn? What's your input cost of acre for soybeans? All right. You sign this, I can buy back X percent of crops from you at input costs. Okay. Now you tend to get really good crops.
Sure.
Okay. Well, they're also real expensive. Okay. So if you're going to go ahead now, geez, this year is probably going to be up around $500 an acre or more for corn. Fertilizer, I know nitrogen costs have went through, insane. Well, if I go ahead and top seed cereal rye and oats into that corn, I can get away with buying 1 acre rather than 2.
A lot more food.
Exactly, because you're jacking up the tonnage of production. And it also is adding diversity. As you said earlier, deer don't want to eat the same thing every day. Now, I love pepperoni pizza. I do. It's not good for you, and it shows on my body. But guess what? I get real sick of eating pepperoni pizza for everything. Best example I can give. Years and years ago, I used to, and it was legal, own 40 acres, would feed deer after the day that gun season would close. I would start feeding deer from then all the way on till spring. There would still, every year, there still be a couple feet of snow on the ground as we're getting towards spring. And I'm feeding them Antler King's, 1 part Antler King's pelleted feed, 1 part corn, 4 part oats. Okay. Pretty darn, you're not getting better feed out there than that, naturally. It's not but yet still, weeks before the spring melt truly was done, my deer numbers would drop off real hard. And I am firmly convinced that the only reason is because they were sick and darn tired of eating corn, oats, and this pelleted feed mix every single day.
Yeah.
Diversity is big.
Well, they like a variety. Well, you like going to a buffet, I like going to a buffet, and that's what the deer does.
Exactly.
So here's another one. Here's another myth. Only good doe is a dead doe.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Don't get me wrong. Here's what I think has happened. For one thing, from a DNR statewide management issue, it's a heck of a lot easier increasing deer numbers than reducing deer numbers. We've proven that 5,000 times over in Wisconsin since CWD was discovered. It doesn't matter what your thoughts are on CWD, the DNR believes we need to eradicate the whitetails in Wisconsin to cure the problem. Yeah, we haven't. There, years and years and years and years ago, I was interviewing the guy who was in charge of a portion of the CWD zones. He told me that his goal, their goal, not his, was to drop the deer population to 5 deer per square mile over the entire state. Not that this would solve, that this would not cure, it would slow the spread of CWD. Have we ever even marginally got close to... This was, don't quote me on this number, but at least 12 years ago. So in this 12 years, I would think, since this is the priority of the Department of Natural Resources to drop Wisconsin's deer numbers to 5 deer per square mile across the entire state in well over 10 years, I would believe that you'd have ample time to make some headway on that. Yeah, no. We can't, when deer numbers get too high, there's only so much the state can do to incentivize us to kill deer. And I think deer and deer hunting, we did a study once upon a time that said something about, don't quote me on this, but 2.5 is the max a hunter's willing to shoot on average. Yeah. So I understand that, but at the same time, I've managed ground in central Minnesota where these deer numbers were so... Let me back up just a smidge. My goal is always to have the deer population at approximately 50% of the habitat's carrying capacity. When the population is at 50% of what the habitat can support, You can actually harvest every bit as many deer because you don't have as much death, and your reproduction is that much more increased. Okay. The difference is they are far healthier and far, yes, happier. Their quality of life is infinitely better than when they're at. Everybody thinks more deer is better. When these deer populations are actually at the habitat's carrying capacity, that means that the habitat cannot hold any more deer. For every one birth, there has to be a death. Okay, that is an utter living hell on these whitetails. I mean, I would not wish that existence on my worst mortal enemy on earth. It's horrible.
And what does that stress do to a whitetail's buck? They're stressed.
Exactly.
They're going to shrink. They're going to get smaller.
Their antlers are their body size, heck, their bones themselves are actually smaller. Their skeleton, their bone mass, its density. No. Having deer numbers too high is very, very bad. Having deer numbers at around half of the habitat's carrying capacity, that you ask any whitetail biologist out there. As far as a whitetail survival aspect goes, that's a sweet spot. Okay. Now I'm managing deer up in central Minnesota. Yeah, this population is at, and nice small little piece of, I think it was 1,200 and some odd acres. Okay. They weren't even at 20% carrying capacity. But yet, when I bought my hunting license, the lady asked me how many of my doe tags I would want, because I can get up to 5 right then and there. What? Come on, people. Let's use some common sense here. These deer numbers are nowhere near too high up there, and if you're actually shooting does, you're being your own worst enemy.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, the nice thing is there weren't many wolves in that area because there weren't any deer. That's pretty bad.
And the reverse can be true too. You can have all neighbors that don't believe in shooting any does, because they want those numbers. So then you, on your place, you're shooting tons of them.
Well, and then what ends up happening is, you create a system for yourself that you just can't keep up. It doesn't, honestly, in situations like that with high deer numbers, having been there before myself, heck, I will never forget texting Dan Schmidt when I was out and I had all the tags. This is 100% legal, and this property was absolutely pitifully overpopulated with deer. The habitat was, there were fawns dying in spring in Illinois, central Illinois. That stuff ain't supposed to happen, period, because they don't really have winter. It was because the deer numbers were so ridiculously high, and none of the neighbors were shooting squat. Heck, I shot 5 does in one sit in an hour. And I'm texting Dan while I'm doing it. Get another one. Yeah, I had 10 tags. And donated every ounce of that venison was utilized. After filling my own freezer, all the rest went to the Donate the Hungry program in Illinois. Hope that still is going on, because that is a heck of a good program, and it is awesome when we can actually do some good for this rock while we're enjoying our passion and making the rock a better place, because that place was so ridiculously over. Right? So I shot 5 deer in a 1-hour sit. Looked like heck around me. I was shooting Illuminox. It looked like I was trying to decorate a Christmas tree. I ended up stopping at 5 just because of the work. The next day you couldn't tell that I'd done anything, because you get this, again, use that osmosis thing, which I know is gases, but there's still way too dang many does over there on the neighbors, so
they just keep coming.
I'll just shift over here and come. One of the biggest things that is not mentioned in all this, that is never mentioned, social stress. We talk so much about nutrition. We talk a decent amount about genetics. Oh my word, if you shoot a 2.5-year-old buck, you might be strung up outside and beaten after you were tied and feathered. But we never talk about, next to never talk about, what the heck stress does to these whitetails. Hunting that place was unbelievable that year. You could not get out to your stand early enough. There it is, October 1st. You're going out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You're kicking deer off those food plots. Why? Because they were under such unbelievably high stress. The very most subordinate. We think of dominance almost exclusively in the buck world, but it's every bit as big of a play in the family group end of things as well. And those dominant family groups, they take the best of everything. Best bedding, best feeding, best water, and they actually literally protect it. If you haven't ever seen it, those does, they'll get right up on their back feet and they will sit there and smack the heck out of themselves with their front hoofs. They will whack fawns on the, if it's not theirs, and actually if it is theirs, when the rut's starting to get close, they'll go ahead and whack fawns right on the head with their hoof. They're very territorial. The reason those does were coming out so early is because they were subordinate groups. And as soon as the next more dominant group came out, they got kicked off. And they would feed for, and then another more dominant, and they got kicked off. And then another more dominant, and then the bucks start coming. It was just, you could literally hunt on October 1st all day long and be seeing deer while sitting on a field.
Just doesn't happen. We're supposed to.
No, and that's all stress related. Stress is such a negative on. Let's focus on what everybody seems to be interested in. Antlers. You want to watch a buck's antlers go down? Stress them out.
Yeah.
You want to watch them go up? Don't stress them out. Why do you think virtually every deer farmer that's out there that's just trying to grow antler inches takes that buck and puts him all by himself? He's not with other bucks for most of the year. He's not. If all you're trying to do is create the biggest rack you possibly can, he's not with other bucks, period, end of story. Why? Social stress. He wants to be outside of breeding. He wants to be alone.
Yeah.
And when you're it's not the same anymore, but I think of it as walking down the halls of Barron High School when I was in school. If you were getting picked on, the kids that were getting picked, it was not fun at all, and their life sucked. It's the same stuff out in the deer world.
Yeah.
When you're the inferior one, and there's a whole bunch of superior physical beings around you, if they're in a bad mood, it ain't pretty.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We've been blessed, to hunt all the way across the country. And it's always interesting when you're in Kansas or Texas and you're sitting on the feeder because you get to see that. You get to see that big doe come in and just literally protect the feeder. She'll eat a little bit, but she'd rather let her family members eat everything there and keep every other deer off of that. And then on top of it, if you're in a state where after the bucks drop, because if a buck comes in, normally they'll be submissive to him, but the minute his antlers go off, that doe will take over and just kick him out of that same area. It's pretty amazing.
Well, the thing that I haven't done the Texas thing, but the thing I found fascinating is back when I owned a 40, I would feed after the gun season would end. There was a doe fawn that had obviously been shot as it was running straight away from the person. The person blew off most of its back leg. It was just hanging there by a little bit of hide. Same time, this area, I had a 4.5-year-old buck, which, that doesn't happen in this area. Okay. He's coming in to feed. I would go ahead and spread the feed out as much as I could, because you put it in one pot, all you're going to have is fighting, and you're trying to do good here. So anytime he walked in, the seas just parted. I never saw, the does would be acting all aggressive towards each other's bucks would, no, nobody would eat. All he had to do was glance at him. The most I ever saw him do in aggression is literally lift his front hoof about 3 inches off the ground and put it back down. Gone. except for that doe fawn. He would completely ignore. That was the only deer that he would allow to feed with him. I always thought that was the most amazing darn thing I'd ever seen. And at the same time, goes ahead and does make the point about how there is competition for this stuff at all times. So that there is. When you are talking a limited anything that they want, competition. What does competition breed in the whitetail world? Stress. What does stress result in the whitetail world? Nothing good.
Yeah. Yes. Stress hurts everybody, people
Exactly.
included. It doesn't matter where it is. Last question. I'm going to give you one more. So a person has a small property, 40 to 100 acres. It's not worth managing it.
Oh, could not possibly disagree more. Here's one of the big myths in all this junk is exactly what this isn't worth it. You have to have sprawling acres, and you have to have deep. Here's the dirty little secret. If you got sprawling acres and you got deep pockets, you really don't need to do habitat improvement, and you're going to have really good hunting.
Yeah.
Okay? The thing that I've retired from doing, I don't do outside consulting anymore, just a little bit of private for a couple long-time clients. But I used to offer outside private consulting. What I typically do is I would have 3 to 4 properties that I would manage for, well, actually I have 4 to 5 properties. I'm messing up what I'm trying to say here. 4 to 5 properties that I would manage 4 to 6 years. Get all the improvements done, get it essentially to the point where this is an assembly line now. You guys just need to maintain it and continue operating the line. Okay, then I'd move on to another property. In there'd be one. One property would always be a really big one. I always kept it at 1 though, because you can only handle so many properties over 1,000 acres. Okay. Yeah, those over 1,000 acre properties were really, really super easy for me to look really smart on. And for them to do really well, because they control a lot of dirt. On the small properties, it's not as easy. And that is actually why I think it is, in my experience, so critically important to do these things. You have so much smaller of room for error. Mm-hmm. I couldn't drive all of the deer off of those large properties if I made it my mission. You give me a 40, I can do that real easy.
In an hour.
You give me a 40, I can do it just by hunting.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Just by. So, on those 40, 80, 120 acre properties, if you want a good hunting property, you sit down and you put in that thought and planning up front, and then you make it so. One of the best lessons I learned of all places hunting public ground was that even something as small as 10 acres, if you can have a 10-acre area that is left alone by humans, that is completely surrounded by every yard ape in this world, including myself, pummeling the snot out of that ground, guess what? They're going to have a disproportionately high number of deer in that 10 acres, and within that 10 acres, they're going to move so much more freely during daylight than they ever will outside it. So now you take that 40. First question I have when I'm looking at, the first question I have is, what are the goals? Next question, what do I got to work with? Then, all right, how can I go ahead and set this up so I hunt as little of the deer cover as I possibly can, but make that little bit of hunting of the deer cover super effective so I can leave the overwhelming majority. So I've got a 40, 20 of it's open, 20 of it's wooded. Hey, if I can make it so I'm not hunting 18 acres of those woods,
more power to you, all right?
Oh, man. Over the course of the season, while all those neighbors that, man, if they only hunted like me, if they only passed up the deer I passed up, yeah, they're trashing their woods. Their hunting is getting worse with each day while mine's getting better. Because those, even something 15 acres will draw deer like a magnet, as long as you make them feel safe there. How do you make them feel safe there? You give them good cover and you stay the heck out. Mm-hmm. And you accomplish that by manufacturing high odds, low impact stands before you do anything else. The first thing and then I'll let you wrap this up, but the first thing I always do when I step foot on new ground, where are the spots I can get to, hunt, and get out without being detected? Once I have a list of those, now, okay, which are the spots that make the most sense to hunt? Okay, these are the spots I'm going to target. I'm going to go in and I'm going to improve those areas, and I'm going to make them high odds, low impact spots. But figure out how you're going to get in, where your stand is, and how you're going to get out before you do anything else.
As a hunter, when you do that, you know it's effective if every time you hunt there, you see about the same amount of deer. Not maybe one day over another, but on average over 30 days, if you're seeing the same numbers, you're doing a good job. If that number is going down, there's a problem.
If that number's going down, you're training them to stay away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and your trail camera photos are going to show all nighttime movement. That's what it's all
Exactly.
about. Great advice, Steve. Thank you, for joining us here on our podcast. Join us next time and click below to like us and share it. And it's been a pleasure.
Always fun, Brad. Always.
The Deer Talk Now podcast is brought to you by CuddyLink cell cameras. Up to 24 cameras, one cell plan, and as low as $10 per month. 10-point crossbows, the fastest crossbows in the world. Wildlife Research Center's Scent Killer Gold. Apply it, dry it, and go hunt. Full range hanging systems, the best way to display your shoulder mount trophies. Hunt Stand, the #1 hunting and land management app. The $1 Million Buck Bash by Apex Competitions. And Traditions Firearms. Feel the difference.